Hello everyone! Today we're going to be checking out Valkyria Chronicles, Persecution and Atrocity. This is by Rosencreutz, I believe that's how you pronounce their username. I'm not really sure if I butchered it. I'm really sorry. I did get permission from this content creator that I can react to this video. So if you do enjoy the video, then make sure to give that video a like, comment down below, and you know all the drill. Basically, make sure to support them. And I do want to be upfront. I did watch Valkyria Chronicles as an anime a long time ago when it was first released. And I did watch my husband play it a little bit, like the one that was the one that the anime was based off of a long time ago, but he didn't really finish it, so I never really got to see like the ending either. And I don't really have a PC, so I can't play it. Just to be upfront. But I did really enjoy the anime, and I was really fond of the story and the world itself. So I'm really looking forward to watching this video. Obviously, I've never played the games myself, so I can't really say much of the differences, but I will be going in with the anime perspective, which I watched back in, I think, middle school, high school. I can't remember when exactly it came out, but it was a long time ago. Just for reference, I'm 30 now, so it's been a long time ago. I basically watched it when it first released. So if you enjoy me reacting to this type of things, then make sure to recommend me other videos. It doesn't need to be Valkyria Chronicles. It could be other games, gacha games, whatever it is that is interesting, go for it. And I will ask the content creator if I can have permission to react to the video before releasing my reaction to it. But yes, let's get started. I am quite looking forward to this. I will have the subtitles up because I need it in order to consume the content better. But let's get started.
Let me tell you about a game, and you can keep a mental note of if the premise sounds familiar. Valkyria Chronicles is a game about a continent-spanning conflict called the Second European War, styled as EW2. The conflict is between westward democratic nations and an autocratic expansionist power, notable for its use of supremacist rhetoric. Before this war, there was a conflict that took a similar shape in terms of the nations involved, predictably titled the First European War and styled EW1. In both of these wars, a small, resource-rich but neutral nation sandwiched between greater powers was invaded by the initial aggressor. The conflict saw the rise and development of powerful mechanized war machines, of particular note, the tank. Where EW1 is noted for the shape of battle being trench warfare, EW2 is notably centered on fluid, squad-based combat. In said conflict, there are two superstates fighting for dominion, the Atlantic Federation and the East European Imperial Alliance. An otherwise neutral, resource-rich nation called Gallia sits between the two and is neutral more in that it hasn't become part of either superpower, not in that it doesn't get roped into conflict. Realistically, it's a third factor, an unaligned party, more than it is, say, neutral in a join no wars sense. On its face, this is a simplified World War II, yeah? Two sides, quasi-Benelux, that's also sort of Switzerland, no Soviets, not a war of clear ideology, just resources. The two sides are superstates, not complex alliances. There's no other theater or colonial conflict. The bad guys are bad simply because they're mean aggressors and little more, and the good guys, well, it's actually not so simple. Half the point of establishing all this is just to get people grounded. The other half is to clarify that Valkyria Chronicles isn't a world of allegory and vague occasional parallels, it's a parallel world on the whole. When
that is true.
Anime World War II game, I don't mean it literally, nor am I saying it's in a made-up setting with tanks and planes and stop it there. In fact, planes aren't mass adopted yet. The aggressor East European Imperial Alliance is less of a German Empire or Nazi Germany than they are an Austrian Empire in some ways. The protagonist nation, so to speak, of Gallia is not just a Low Countries allegory being invaded to get around defenses, but rather explicitly to obtain resources.
This is actually helping me remember what I watched back in, I think it was middle school or high school. It's so hard to remember, but it was many years ago, like 20 years ago, almost. Oh no, if it's 20 years ago, then I would be 10. So I guess it was like 15 years ago. I remember like some of the political conflict within the anime being explained, and it was basically this. So it's really nice to get like a recap of the political conflict going on in this particular world.
Galia is invaded over rich deposits of a super mineral called ragnite that can be used for a variety of purposes, from powering street lamps to tank fuel and ammunition to medical compounds. For another blurred parallel, while Galia isn't invaded to get around an equivalent Maginot Line, there is, incidentally, a Maginot-style fort in the game world protecting the bad guy capital. Or maybe it's not the Maginot, but a West Wall, but that's in the 4th game, which has the plot of what if the Allies did Barbarossa without the Commissar Order and stuff, of course. All that to say, historical elements become part of the world-building toolkit, a host of references to be made, but not often strict connections. The game uses details of our timeline in referential and familiar ways, but very little is a simple one-to-one.
I do like it when games do that because it makes it easier to build the world inside your head so you understand the world a lot faster compared to if it was like using completely new historical things that are only within that world but has nothing similar to our world. So I do very much enjoy a lot more when the game uses details from our world, so that'll be a lot easier to absorb the world building and understand how everything works.
If that premise is interesting to you, well, now might be a good time to put this video down and find a copy of the game. From here on, I can't avoid brushing against important plot details. And that brings us towards the point of this video. Valkyria Chronicles creates its world using many real-world details, including the concept of a Holocaust. But it would be irresponsible to dive into all the questions such a statement raises without having a better sense of the world as a whole, so let's talk about Valkyria Chronicles and its war story.
Ooh, go ahead.
There's more than one form anime World War II could take. With this
That's
being
true.
a parallel but not literal iteration, and given it incorporates magic, the potential for deviation is high. They don't have to have somewhere in-game analogous to Poland, for example. There doesn't have to be an ethno-state dictatorship on one side, and there doesn't have to be alliance networks and non-aggression pacts, and I don't stress these parallels with our real-world history in order to diminish the creative choices and world-building of the game, but to clarify what the world is like and how much one can anticipate the world based on knowledge of our real-world Second World War. And from that, understand the decision to include not only persecution, but concentration camps. That's what makes it interesting to have something in the game that's analogous to the Holocaust. In making a game that's got the aesthetic trappings of World War II, they could have easily avoided the subject. In fact,
I just want to note, let me go back a little bit. I shipped them so hard. When I was watching the anime, I was like, they need to get together by the end. And when they did get together, I was so happy. That meant the world to me at the time. Okay, moving forward.
Game that's got the aesthetic trappings of World War II, they could have easily avoided the subject. In fact, I'd argue that's often why people use parallel fictional settings in the first place, to avoid the potential landmines of controversy, difficult conversations, and potential for a negative reception that touching one of the most sensitive topics in history might bring onto your narrative. In fact, when I refer to it as being on the surface World War II but simpler, that's sort of the ideal spot a lot of fictional settings want to land in. They can brush aside all the discomforts and focus on the aesthetic things like cool tanks, edgy antagonists, and dramatic battles. It's similar to how sometimes the fantasy genre means doing the Middle Ages without the dark parts. There's
That's
no
true.
harm in the omission either. It doesn't exactly fuel a clean Wehrmacht myth to omit crimes against humanity from a made-up war setting. The risk that taking on the inherently complex elements of war in your anime wargame runs is that your anime wargame wants war to be fun. The path of least resistance is to smooth away the messy parts, and it's noteworthy that Valkyria Chronicles both does not do that and manages to pull together a narrative where war comes with harsh realities
so cool.
More than edgy set dressing. I won't go through all the story beats or provide a full summary. The base premise you have so far should suffice. For some quick caveats, 1. Yes, I'm aware that the character artist Raita Honjo is also a prolific smut artist, and I use that term non-derogatorily, but it feels YouTube safer than the actual terms.
Makes
His
sense.
designs are very tame here, and he doesn't seem to have had an impact on the plot, which is my focus here, so for our purposes, his involvement isn't too relevant. Learning
That makes
he's
sense.
the same guy who came up with the base designs for Katawa Shoujo was like when Light touches that scrap of the Death Note and gets back a ton of memories. If only there was someone with the credentials to make a video about that game. Anyway, that's pointedly not what this video is about. 2. One could pick apart the story for some tone issues here and there with little ding noises and everything, I'm sure, but beyond the very start, where the game has a redundant town under attack sequence and some tone problems.
What should we do with the bodies, ma'am?
We'll bury them.
Arrested and shot at? You've had a busy day of it, haven't you, Welkies?
I think it's a good plot. Something as subjective as plot quality is only relevant to us in so much as having either a tonal mess or a million plot holes would sink even the most emotionally complex narrative. The game finds a degree of balance between fun war game and war is bad and tragic plot moments. For example, it actually...
Oh yeah, by the way, I just wanted to, I guess, clarify. So let me go back to the part of the video. So for number 1, this content creator, I just wanted to make sure it's clarified so that there isn't any like fights about it or confusion. But the content creator is not against Raito Honjo or the stuff that he's made. It's just more so pointing out the differences between the projects he's normally involved with compared to something so serious like a World War II simplified game. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware of this so that there is no confusion regarding that or even anger about it. Which makes sense because this video is about the serious parts of the story that reflect our actual human world. And I'm sure in some cases, like in some games, people like to make fun of like, oh, this artist, created this kind of art and therefore this game isn't as serious or it doesn't really matter, or they make like memes out of it and whatnot, which is not really necessary in terms of or which shouldn't be needed when it comes to discussions about a game's world. And also one of the things that I do agree with is the fact that the story, although I did enjoy it, I will admit that I really enjoyed it when I was younger, hence why I shipped the two so hard, like the two main characters. But yeah, there were some parts of the story that could have been worked on, so I'm not surprised that the game itself also had some issues. But just because a story is bad does not mean that there is nothing to appreciate about it. So we probably don't need to talk about in the comments about how the game sucks or the game is so amazing, because that's not the point of this video. It's more about the way that they utilize real world events and concepts in the world of Valkyria Chronicles to create a really compelling story and world. But also, the way that they say some certain things just makes me laugh. I mean, it's not funny, but like, it's so weird.
Quality is only relevant to us in so much as having either a tonal mess or a million plot holes would sink.
Yeah, there was a lot of
emotionally
plot
complex
holes.
narrative.
But it's
game finds
okay.
A degree of balance between fun war game and war is bad and tragic plot moments. For example, it actually emphasizes the protagonists taking a human life for the first time.
This part actually stood out to me a lot in the anime, because I believe they also showed that in the anime too, where they talked about taking a human life for the first time. And I think in a lot of series, not just in games in particular, but in like anime and so forth, they don't tend to talk about like taking a human life for the first time in a very mature manner. But the fact that they were able to just discuss it here without like having like severe breakdowns was quite refreshing, at least at the time when I was really young. Because most of the time, whenever something like that happens, they have like breakdowns, or they like freak out and go crazy, or things like that, or get totally depressed. So for me, when I encountered this for the first time and saw this kind of discussion, it was enlightening and refreshing. I quite enjoyed that aspect of the story, despite its issues and flaws.
Even if it's a bit short. This coincides with a few other mature choices the broader series makes, like the use of prisoner soldiers by the good guys, some morally gray strategic plans,
That's
self-serving
true.
coups by the Allies' representative nation, and racism not being uniquely a trait of the bad guy.
Yes,
Axis
that's true.
side. Put a pin in that last.
This racism isn't unique to the Axis side. I really, really liked how gray the characters were in this story for the most part. That was one thing that really stood out to me when I was younger, because most of the time, especially for shonen anime, I don't know if this would be considered shonen anime, I don't think it is. But at the time, a lot of series back in middle school, high school ish, unless it's like psychological horror or psychological in general, they tend to be very like black and white. Like you're either good or you're bad in some way or form. And this series did something different compared to all the other series that were being released in that season. Not that I remember every single one that I watched at the time, but I remember this series very well because of the difference in the way that they tackle certain topics.
Last one. There are a lot of ways this could have been mishandled overall, and I think it's occasionally iffy the way it is, and to some extent that comes from the anime element in its design, but at least they didn't go with a plot about cat girls being persecuted by the Nazis and
I mean,
or something.
there are some that are like that.
Well, I mean, that was the original design, but look,
Oh.
it's an anime game, it's got genre staples, and those sometimes map poorly onto.
I'm glad they didn't do that.
Really close to the reality of trying to tell a war story with a stand-in for the Holocaust. Case in point, the mandatory beach episode ends with everyone laughing after one of the hot-headed members of your squad gets bonked with a volleyball.
I'm so sorry.
I think I remember an episode like that.
Concentration camp and the death of slave laborers. And I can't believe I'm going to say this sentence, but to be frank, that's not to say that catboy persecution is inherently too silly to work. Fire Emblem Path of Radiance found a way to create a fictional society with its own fantasy racism and persecution of people with literal cat ears, and it's fine. Good, even. The story is built around the persecution as part of it, and it doesn't feel like an express metaphor for an exact people or historical moment. You don't look at Path of Radiance and go, yeah, this is insert historical atrocity in fantasy anime form, but you do recognize what persecution is. With Valkyria,
So I know I'm pausing so much, but there's just so much to unpack here, and I'm like remembering everything about this anime, but now it's series, but avoiding that part. The beach episode, I do feel like, I mean, obviously it might not always fit the tone, which I agree with, but I do think it makes you let down your guard a little bit before hitting you with something really deep. And one of the things I remember best, if you have watched One Piece, they actually do this really well. Or it makes you realize just how important the lighthearted moments are in order to create balance when you're consuming something. Actually, instead of One Piece, I'll use One Piece and Detective Conan as an example, but for One Piece, you get a lot of lighthearted moments in the first pre-time skip part of the series. And it makes you feel good until you reach the war. And then basically, if you have not watched One Piece or plan to, I suggest you to skip a little bit forward because this is spoiler content. But the part with the war and where it keeps just getting heavier and heavier with no breathing time, it makes you almost feel suffocated by the end of the war arc. And it makes you miss the old lighthearted days too. And it makes you realize, oh yeah, we definitely need more lighthearted moments scattered in between so that it's easier to consume the story. For many people that's like that. And to some degree, I was feeling it too. A much more better example though would be of making this balance happen really well by adding in slice of life type of random things would be Detective Conan. So in Detective Conan, if you haven't watched it and you plan to, again, skip, spoilers, There's the Black Organization arc, which is extremely heavy. Like there is no sign of like happiness or lightheartedness whatsoever in the Black Organization arcs. And just 7 episodes makes you so exhausted because of how heavy it is, to the point that you crave the slice of life type of episodes where, oh, someone died. Okay, that's fine. You kind of reach that point. But because there's a lot of slice of life episodes in between the Black Organization arcs, it makes the Black Organization arcs a lot easier to consume because you're balancing it with the many, many slice of life episodes that'll make you feel better inside. So I do see why the beach episode might be a little bit off. But I do think that there are some benefits to it, especially if someone is exhausted and doesn't want to always, see persecution, atrocity, and all of that stuff in every part of the game. Not that there's anything wrong with that too, but I feel like that might be the purpose of it. That, and also bringing your guard down so that it hits even harder, perhaps.
It's very clearly anime World War II, which means there would have been a Catgirl Holocaust. Now, they didn't go with that design, and we should be thankful, because I suspect it would lead to the worst fandom imaginable. I bring up the design they didn't go
You're not
with
wrong,
specifically
maybe.
to insert this point. There's a tension between how grounded or distanced portrayals of persecution are, and from that tension, we find a line for the absurd, and with absurdity comes, well, it's not quite offense so much as a distasteful display, something from which it's too hard to acknowledge the deep thoughts or emotional threads of the story, because you're distracted by the absurdity. The absurdity wouldn't be isolated to a single cutscene or a tension-breaking moment, it would be baked into the premise. I'm not going to digress into the quote-unquote point of Neko people in anime and the inherent cuteness of animal features and all that, because hopefully it's apparent why it's weird to make the signifiers of a persecuted people the cute things about them, or worse, explicitly inhuman traits. The human mind was not meant to comprehend the uwuification of dialogue. So instead, they went with an ethnic group of human people who have visible signifiers of their otherness that are more grounded. And that's true to life in some sense, but it's also kind of uncomfortable, largely in the way making up any persecuted people would be, especially when using details that even slightly resemble the real world. That becomes its own entire balancing act. Too much.
That actually is what stood out to me at the time of the anime. Usually it would be inhuman characteristics that would be discriminated against inside an anime world. But at the time, I was surprised to see that it was based on black hair. And while that idea is not exactly different these days, especially when you like read a lot of and consume a lot of isekai stuff, but it feels more, I guess, not grounded, but I just thought it stood out a lot at the time of when I first watched it, because it felt more real, I suppose.
Resemblance, and it starts to feel like it validates stereotypes or spreads them. Too little and
That's
it feels
true.
totally ungrounded, or there's what I can only call, with extreme trepidation, overcorrection. Like the persecuted people are hated in the game world and called ugly and stuff, but in our real world sensibilities are all supermodels, i.e. elves, every other time they do this trope in a fantasy world. Valkyria's Darkson end up being a mix of characteristics so as to not be clearly just one real world group's parallel, and they navigate prejudices unique to the game's world. I think once the developers set on the path of including an anime concentration camp in their game, the best way forward was to pull from history in allusion to things, rather than create very concrete singular parallels. Looking at this framework, I don't think Valkyria Chronicles is a must-play masterpiece and all that, but I think dismissing it on the counts of being anime or occasional missteps alone would drop an interesting conversation this game starts about representing atrocity, war, and oppression. If it had been Catgirls, maybe I'd have dismissed it. With that,
hey, there's nothing wrong with Catgirls.
The form persecution takes in Valkyria Chronicles. One thing I want to get out of the way right away is that the name of the oppressed peoples is the Darkson, which I'm sure people are tempted to read into a few ways, and the English dub also has them pejoratively called dark hairs sometimes. So, yeah.
See what she's wearing? Take a good look at that shawl. She's a Darkson.
Then that explains it. I thought this place stunk. Now we know it
Excuse
does.
me?
So we got ourselves a fat one and a stinky one. PU. It's a regular pig farm in here.
Personally, while I know there's some bad history to the connection of dark with non-whiteness and race and all, I can't help giving the benefit of the doubt that it's accidentally leaning into that while etymologically just being dark sin put together. This ties into the way the prejudices against them in the world of Valkyria are quote-unquote justified by an alleged sin the ancestors of the people committed centuries ago. Religion, in so much as it exists in the game, is tied to nationhood and the mythology of the Valkyria, where in our world
Starting to remember this, yes.
BC/BCE and AD/CE, revolving the Western calendar around the birth of Jesus Christ, this game uses the EC, European calendar year, rooted in when the Valkyria finished their war against the Darkson, and in doing so, secured a homeland for the Europans from the native Darkson. I don't want to get into the ways the means of persecution of the Darkson parallel real-world people and their persecutions, because that could get tasteless. But just know that it's a blend of invented things like negative stereotypes and vague allusions to the real world the same way as anything else in this game. As mentioned before, the term dark hair gets thrown around in the English version, but the other stereotypes have a logic to them, so to speak. Because the Darkson were forced into areas with bad soil quality that ended up being mineral rich, they became associated with mining as a trade, and from that, other negative stereotypes evolved. From mining, they commonly inhabit industrial trades and machine work, and in turn are racially associated with noxious smells. As a form of identifying the Darkson and punishing them for their ancestral sin, they're denied the right to have last names. Persecution is not equal across the continent, though nowhere is free from it. Gallia, which I previously called the protagonist nation, isn't contrasted against the Empire, a nation that literally pogroms the Darkson and puts them in labor camps by being hyperbolic in the other direction, as a nation free of persecution. It is instead a home to lesser persecutions. The man responsible for a significant quantity of Gallia's technological advancement in the last few decades was a Darkson. Despite his value to the nation and the allowance of status and all, he was still never allowed a last name, which again, isn't a cultural practice the Darkson hold, it's one forced onto them. As might be apparent from that description, the prejudice isn't a half-baked lore detail, and more importantly, it's not unique to the bad guys. Your squad, often referred to as like a family, has racist units. It's here that I'll deviate for a second to explain the way Valkyria Chronicles is structured. Valkyria Chronicles tells its stories in chapters and has a wide range of units with semi-distinct traits. This naturally lends itself to a Fire Emblem comparison. It's like older Fire Emblem, in that there's a...
Just so you're aware, I've never really played Fire Emblem. I did play a little bit of it with my husband a long time ago, but I never really read the story. It was just fighting. So I don't really know what's going on with that game. So even if he makes, I guess, comparisons with Fire Emblem, I'm not going to fully understand.
A clear core cast that gets into most cutscenes, and then there's side characters. Few
that makes sense.
Introductory segments or anything, at least in the first game. Most all side characters don't get a second of mandatory screen time outside paralogue side chapters. Like, if you're just watching every story scene in a compilation, you might forget there's a 12-year-old child soldier in the roster. To that end, when I say that there are racist units, and in turn racialized units based on their Darkson subclass, know that not every character gets equal narrative weight, and this isn't fully the story of more than maybe 6 core characters. With that said, it is genuinely noteworthy that 2 of the characters we see the most of are frequently in conflict with the main character's adoptive sister, Isara, because she's a Darkson.
Hold on! Okay, what's going on here?
You really have to ask, Lieutenant? It's either her or me, pal. Who let her in anyway? You really think I'm gonna work with a dark hair? She'll blow us all up. Besides, I can't stand the stink of her! Her type's got a bad reputation and everybody knows it. No Darksons allowed. You hear me?
Oh yes, I've heard everything you have to say. But I'm still a human being the same as you. Besides, no evidence exists to substantiate what you call the Darkson calamity. It's a myth.
Excuse me? So what, you're calling me stupid now?
Stop it, that's enough!
Okay, boss.
I remember this.
We won't fight
It's
alongside
particularly-
no Darkson. What about that, can't you understand?
Hard to swallow in the beginning.
And the characters are racist. This is one of the main ways we, as players, experience the hatred in this world. It's from teammates. Not just enemy propaganda, not just things said by soldiers we're already primed to dislike for being the evil invading army, not even just some random begrudging party member who you can otherwise put in a corner and never think about, but by characters that get ample screen time and are on your side. The story of that dynamic, the story of persecution, is an integral part of the narrative, and it even follows up with having game mechanics which admittedly sounds a little clumsy. You have subclasses based on the Darkson background, and they tend to only befriend each other, which means there's a partial incentive toward segregating your army, or that's one reading.
Oh,
Another is that
that's
segregating
interesting.
your army comes as a clear consequence of individuals and their attitudes, but we'll come back to this. Mechanically, racists get a minus 40% defense debuff if they're near Darksons, because, quote, even just being around Darksons makes them nauseous, leading to a decrease in defense, which is
Wow.
certainly one way to portray racism. The notion of race relations being a mechanic is clumsy, sure, but it's something. It's more evidence that this wasn't just an afterthought, but a definitive part of the game. The developers
That's true.
wanted to center racial and cultural tension. Let's dig into the two racist Gallian soldiers with ample screen time, starting with Bridget Rosie Stark. There's something to the way the game treats her hatred like a quirky trait. Let me put it this way. At times, the game genuinely explores the tension of racism and discomfort between characters and means to integrate it into the broader plot. But sometimes, Rosie being racist feels equivalent to the quirks of Fire Emblem characters that are a stand-in for having a personality. Don't get me wrong, she's not truly that one-dimensional, but it's the bonus trait glued to her tough girl archetype. She's just the racist gal. Let's watch the squad
That's
war
also
correspondent
true.
Elliot interview Rosie.
Hey, Largo, wait up!
Oh, just let him go. We can have a little chat, just the two of us girls. So, Rosie. Can I call you Rosie? Beautiful name, by the way. Do you like flowers?
I used to sing at a bar. It was hardly a flower patch, but my nickname there stuck. Tell you what, though. Some customers came from miles away just to hear me sing.
My. So why's a pretty young songbird with a voice as sweet as a rose so thorny towards Lieutenant Gunther and all those others?
I just ain't trusting my back to a stinking dark hair is all.
Traumatic past experience with a Darkson leave you bitter, maybe?
Think what you want. I got better things to do than sit around gabbing about him is all. You can put me down as allergic, yeah? Just chatting and I'm starting to feel sick.
Bet she'd spill the beans if you got her riled up enough. Maybe next time. Still, a veteran carrying a torch for his captain and a Darkson-hating chanteuse? They may be cranky, but they're characters.
You can see how the racism Rosie puts out there is framed as a quirk. Elliot immediately
Yeah,
jumps
that's
to
true.
assuming there's a reason for it, a justification like a wrongdoing or some kind of trauma. And then she posits that with a little more probing, that story might come out. And it turns out the push Rosie needed was Rosie is justified as racist because her family was collateral damage in a pogrom. Note that the pogrom was committed by Imperial forces, not a Gallian thing, so it doesn't necessarily reflect on the Gallian attitude towards the Darkson, but the way Rosie's hatred is permitted does. In what will be a bit of a recurring sentiment, it doesn't entirely matter to dissect how well written that part of her is, so long as it's not extremely off-putting. It's serviceable for creating the character she is. And of course, since Rosie is racist and the game takes that trait to be a negative, her character arc is about overcoming that racism. We'll come back to this. Now for the other one. Largo. Some of you familiar with the game might object to
Enabler.
referring to Largo as a racist. It isn't a defining characteristic of his, and he's very quick to warm up to Isara. He's less the hate speech kind of racist and more the, well, it doesn't bother me when people say hateful things kind of racist.
And it's an unfair generalization to assume that all Darksons cause trouble for others.
You saying you don't? Look, it's 'cause of you people that my whole...
All right, time out, you two.
You stay out of this, Largo!
We're on patrol here. You keep squawking, and we're likely to get sniped. You too, kid. You know Rosie's got a temper on her. She wouldn't go off if you didn't talk back.
I
That's
don't believe
not
anything I've said is untrue.
a good thing to say, dude.
Stubborn as mules, both of you.
It's obvious that Largo's character isn't centered on his racism so much as his general stubbornness and gruff persona and stuff. He doesn't have an arc of having to work through some negative trait. But he represents what's probably the median of Gallian society, a quiet enabler who only steps in when arguing happens, not when racism starts.
That's
there is in
probably
games
true.
about or including narratives of prejudice a tendency to humanize the oppressors, the racists. It would, after all, do no good if Fire Emblem Jill was just racist for no reason and never changed her ways. The two narrative options they tend to have are, it's childish ignorance and they learn to step away from it, or some kind of justified traumatic response, which tends to be stuff like Rosie, a genuine trauma and misplaced hatred. That way, there's one solid, specific thread to pull at to unravel the racism. That ultimately makes the racism both justified and easy to fix. And to be fair, if they went around making a lot of characters who were just upbringing racist or a world of systemic racist with no way to address it, then most of the cast would be unlikable and it wouldn't really be good for a game where you're supposed to like the people, yeah?
That's true
From here,
too.
we can get into the shape of arguments around race a bit more, and in turn, the resolutions to the issues. The conflicts Largo and Rosie have with Isara are based in racism, but the game does and does not want to call those out, so Isara frames it as disagreements in a way that feels sort of just wrong. One could argue she's being the bigger person here,
Yeah.
or the others are doubling down on the Darksons believe in peace more than anything stuff, but we'll have to table this. Let's address the way the game resolves Rosie's arc. The short version is this. She's racist without much consideration aside from moments where she has to catch herself being normal to Isara and then get mad again. Like a racism tsundere, I guess? And then she witnesses
I
the
guess that's
Holocaust,
true.
and it changes something for her. Suddenly, these people are human to her, not just doombringers. To an extent. She doesn't just say, my racism is over now because of what she witnessed, and I'm of two minds here. One is that it always feels cheap when some flaw in a character is presented as deeply ingrained and then it goes away after one significant event.
That's
it's a
true.
flat sort of resolution, so seeing her know she's holding on to some negative feelings even after her turning point is honestly refreshing.
It's
The
very
other is
realistic,
that,
too.
Well, if there was going to be a significant event that could drastically alter how someone perceives the world, at least on a surface level, witnessing a Holocaust is probably one of them, so I don't think I'd have
That
faulted
is
the
also
writers if they took
true.
that route. In retrospect, for me at least, I earnestly can't decide how I feel about it. Where does that leave us? Remember when I said we
Personally, I feel like it's fine for a story or an anime or even a game, especially if they're not going to like make a second series. Then I do think that this is a good route to take. But for something like a novel, a serialized, it might not be exactly the best way to go about it. And what I mean by that is even though she experienced something like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that she's going to change extremely fast, even if she knows and she's self-aware of her own incorrect ways of thinking. It's really hard for someone to change something that they habitually think. And that's the case with real life as well. And that also goes with trying to have hobbies. You can only have a hobby if you continuously do it, and then eventually that becomes a hobby. Just like that with your thoughts, if you habitually think in some way, it's really hard to break away from it. And you have to keep reminding yourself until eventually that becomes a new habit where you no longer internalize and express racism towards the people that you no longer harbor any racist thoughts about.
We'd come back to how segregating your forces was incentivized by the personality traits of individuals. Well, it's the time of the video where I have to inject in some discussion about individuals versus systemic problems, or face summary execution by orders of insert breadtuber. Rosie's story is of an individual. Largo's is of an individual. Their resolutions are on an individual basis in a world of systemic persecution. How does the game approach said systems, though? I've made the argument that one cannot write off the persecution plotline as just set dressing or a cheap injection of pathos. I've made the argument that this game centers its narrative on persecution as much as on the hardships of war. I can't call them horrors when obviously you're not meant to walk away from the game thinking, wow, war is horrible. This is
as long as they want to make you traumatized.
And I've pointed out the idea of a loose association to religion and nationhood, which is a good place to pick at the foundation of the setting's systems. Let's talk about the position of the Valkyria in this world as the mythologized opponents of the Darkson, and how this story of anti-racism falls into a predictable trap. The game is called Valkyria Chronicles, so obviously the Valkyria are important.
I was so into the Valkyria moments, like, it was just so cool. I love the blue glowing lights and the fights. I just wished it was longer in the anime when they showed them, but it never really scratched that itch that I had at one point, even till the very end. I liked everything about it as a casual watch, except for that particular aspect. But otherwise, it is a decent watch, so I do recommend it if you just want to watch something to turn off your brain cells. But I don't expect you, or you shouldn't expect to think that it's like probably like 100% amazing adaptation of this game, because I don't think it probably is. But if you're someone who never played the game, it's actually a pretty decent watch.
To the narratives. Beyond the living ones we see in-game and their positions of power and impact in some cases, we can also look towards something more subtle. The anthems of Gallia and the Empire reflect both a primacy of the status of the Valkyria and the war with the Darkson, respectively. Gallia's anthem, in so much as we get to see it, includes the lines, "Valkyria, Valkyria, may the bloodline live forever. Valkyria, Valkyria, bless and protect our fertile land." The Empire's is, "Forward we march to conquer those who defiled the graves of our fathers, for the everlasting glory of the Emperor, King of Kings." The importance of the Valkyria cannot be removed from their role in a war that saw the Darkson defeated. They cannot be removed from the myth of the calamity. These nations, in centering the Valkyria and conflict, have made persecution part of their central identity. Gallia's independence is reliant on the Valkyrian descent of its royalty, the prestige that presents, and, in the case of anime World War II, literal magic abilities they possessed. And, big spoilers, this idea of challenging systems as opposed to the actions of individuals does have a pivotal moment with the royals. It turns out that the royal family of Gallia, a symbol of the nation and its independence held up by the power and significance of being Valkyrian by blood, is actually of Darkson descent. The Archduchess reveals this truth in the hopes that it can heal the racial divisions of the nation, and in some ways this reflects an accounting for the way systemic racism plays a part in society while also sort of bowing out to individual responsibility. It's a mix. We don't have time, nor do I have significant interest in getting into Valkyria Chronicles 2, but it's worth noting that the antagonist of that game is essentially a super racist, so obsessed with the Gallian national origin as a Valkyrian-led monarchy that he's working to overthrow the current government, purge the Darksons, and install a lab-grown Valkyrian as the new head of state. He is a caricature of being unable to face inconvenient truths, going so far as to use unnatural modern science to force his national mythological beliefs into reality.
Those types are always the scariest.
His idealized Gallia never existed.
Thank goodness.
Tangent. From that, we understand that race and persecution are unresolved by the Archduchess's revelation. She didn't hit the end racism button and it was just over. Otherwise, the
obviously.
Valkyria 2 would just be some fringe weirdo nobody listened to instead of leading a rebellion. Cordelia's revelation acknowledges how core to Gallian identity their supremacy was, even as a nation that didn't actively match the horrors of the Empire. This also leads us to a question of resistance and proper resistance. There are moments here and there in Valkyria Chronicles where the question of resistance and how to do it is brought up. In some ways, the argument occasionally dips into Largo-esque positions of victim blaming, if you didn't rile her up sort of situations, and hardly goes much further. In another, Rosie, who is, again, the racist character, witnesses the aftermath of the Imperials slaughtering Darkson for expressly ideological purposes and is moved to call for vengeance against whoever did this. In response, Zaka, the second Darkson main character, says it's not their way to meet violence with violence, but to respond with peace. He implies passivity in the face of explicit slaughter is the Darkson way, which, sure, it's very antithetical to the myth that spawned their persecution, but it kind of caters to the narrative that resisting one's own persecution puts you on equal footing with your persecutors. Oh well, at least they didn't go and make one of those tasteless, the people seeking liberation turn out to be too terroristy, and that's how you know liberation is bad actually, and we should all just talk type of things like Bioshock. Oh, for fuck's sake. Okay.
I guess that's good.
Within the narrative of Valkyria 1, resistance as a topic is not handled in an ideal way, but the overall narrative of persecution is surprisingly competent. And from that, we go to how it could have been worse. It doesn't take the easy way out of making persecution something only the evil faction does. It doesn't get lazy.
That was one thing I appreciated.
Final Fantasy XVI is lazy. Deus Ex Human Revolution and Mankind Divided are lazy. Detroit Become Human is, well, that one's arguably worse than lazy, but whatever. The general trend, as I've seen it,
I don't know any of those.
Tell a dramatic and sad story with their game, and it involves persecution. They don't have the nerve to make the parallels to real oppression any more tangible than being a soup of references. Now, the persecuted people in Valkyria are debated on who they represent, arguably inspired by a conglomeration of the Holocaust's ethnic victims, or Japanese, all of which is a matter of perspective, as is the case with any allegory. But the narrative...
It could be the group of people that lives in Japan who are discriminated against, but I don't know if they were in a camp. But also, this isn't really highly talked about, but it could also be about the time, for example, in the Kanto earthquake of 1912, I believe, where civilians actually killed people, other civilians, because they thought if it was like in Tokyo-ish area, but at the time, you know, there were Koreans, Chinese, even people from Japan, but from other regions would go to Tokyo at the time. And when the Kanto earthquake happened, they blamed the Koreans and other races for the poisoning of wells, which isn't true, and the burning of fires, which also wasn't true. It was basically their own negligence of turning off the fire after they use it, the gas or something along those lines. And so they basically all started to discriminate and kill off actual like civilians, even people who are Japanese but just had kansai-ben or something along those lines. So it could either be about that, which I highly doubt because it's not really much talked about, or it could be about the more of a reflection of the discriminatory behavior that they have towards I forgot what they're Ainu, I think that's what they were called. I really can't, the native people, I can't really remember the name. Let me actually look it up for a second. But it's probably that instead of the Korean one that I talked about, because the Kanto earthquake isn't really talked about or taught in Japan. And since this is a Japanese game, it's most likely about the Ainu. Yeah, the indigenous ethnic group, because they were pretty discriminated against. I just don't know if it's internment camp stuff. Let me actually look at it again.
And sad story with their game, and it involves persecution. They don't have the nerve to make the parallels to real oppression any more tangible than being a soup of references. Now, the persecuted people in Valkyria are debated on who they represent, arguably inspired by a conglomeration of the Holocaust's ethnic victims.
Yeah, I feel like it's probably Ainu, especially with the way that they're dressed too. It could be a possibility of that.
Or Japanese, all of which is a matter of perspective, as is the...
Because of I just don't know about the internment camps. I guess it would be like Holocaust plus Ainu, maybe? I'm not really sure. What do you think? Let me know down below.
With any allegory. But the narrative isn't a mush of signifiers. In Deus Ex: Mankind Divided, there's imagery that spans the civil rights movement to the persecution of Jews to weird pro-life metaphors, and it just becomes a mess that's at once easy to point at and name a reference to, but impossible to conclude means much of anything. For more of that, there's an errant signal video. The end result is clearly that the creators don't want to give a message. They want set dressing. Persecution is bad isn't exactly a hot take. What makes Valkyria different is that when it steps into showing you the persecution, it's not just an expo dump or something they tell you is happening and over. It's something you see. Characters you're supposed to like say racist things.
Yes, that is very true.
It's not just a hostile world, even though it's literally a war story.
And one of the things I did really like about Valkyria Chronicles was what he said about the racism and the discrimination. It's not like outright all the time. Sometimes it's very subtle. And in most cases, the discrimination and racism is quite outright in a lot of series, which makes it easier for viewers to understand what's going on. But I do appreciate the more subtle representation because that's more reflective of how people are like when they're being racist or ignorant or even discriminatory against another person.
Story. What I mean is that it's not just ceaseless prejudice and cruelty. Sometimes games get overindulgent with the mood of your kind aren't welcome around.
Not just games, even just regular series.
Cast the real world onto this piece of media. It's not that it's just a game, so much as that the over-application of allegory unto moments that should be taken as distinct is most likely to muddle the narrative. Yes, there's a grave sin narrative that in some ways parallels the way the death of Christ is invoked by certain people as a justification for hate, and they may have pulled that from a real-world idea, but in the world of Valkyria, the implication of the myth being wrong is that if it were right, the persecution would be justified. And that just isn't true. It shouldn't be true. From a narrative standpoint, the player spends hours
Faldio.
The calamity really was caused by the Dark Sin, according to ancient accounts, and sitting with that, lacking the revelation, the player obviously isn't expected to become okay with the persecution. The basic story presented by the game, even when it is putting an agnostic framing on the calamity, is that the Dark Sin are the natives of Europa. The generally held view of the Valkyrie is that they saved the continent, even though they are also the conquerors who arrived from elsewhere. Buried in that is some implied idea that left to their own devices, the Darkson would have destroyed their own homeland for no reason. With this, the game simultaneously stumbles into being a Holocaust narrative and a story of centuries-old conquest. To speak from our real-world history, the Holocaust targeted many different people, but there were two major ethnic groups who were specifically vulnerable and cast as having no home: the Jews and Roma. While most blurred parallels in this game are ostensibly helpful in creating a proper distance from which to tell the kind of persecution story it wants to tell, there's something distinctly jarring about the crossroad created here. To speak in real-world parallels, if only briefly, it is drawing from Nazi persecution of the ethnic victims and, in a far less explored but narratively implicit way, the struggle of colonized people who have been displaced and marginalized in their own homeland for centuries. It bears
Sounds like a lot of countries.
And European descendants acknowledge coming from elsewhere, never making claims otherwise. Are these two things incompatible? Sort of. It's hard to draw that line. The Darkson are stateless, and they are othered. Part of me wants to say that the stateless circumstances of Jews and Roma is an integral element of the historical persecutions. But that's not actually at odds with being put in camps and corralled into ever-shrinking pockets of land, is it? No, indeed, where the historical parallels the game most aesthetically mirrors don't match up in this moment, there are other historical precedents that conform neatly to this framework. The indigeneity of the Darkson might not neatly fit a World War II parallel narrative, but it's not an unfamiliar story.
Oh.
So after all that
makes sense, actually.
Left with? Valkyria Chronicles goes to tragic and dark and emotionally driven places more than once. There's an entire cutscene humanizing the enemy soldiers by having one die, crying out for his mother. More than that, the game centers a narrative of persecution more than one might expect for a game that adopted World War II as a setting because tanks are cool and Band of Brothers was popular. Despite the aesthetic hurdles of
That's
being
true.
an anime video game ostensibly constructing a Holocaust story, Valkyria Chronicles manages to present a compelling narrative of persecution and avoid almost all of the pitfalls one might expect from trying to do just that, given genre conventions and the medium. And that's why I think it's worth exploring the way they present it. I can make fun of the fact they almost made it about cat girls, but they didn't. I can point out how they put the chapter about a concentration camp right after the mandatory beach episode, because that's genuinely deranged, but at the end of the day, they did try to keep the horrors of war, the atrocities surrounding it, when they didn't have to.
I do want to point out one other thing about the beach episode, but I mean, in real life, even if someone is in war, there are still times when they get to, relax and have some moment of happiness, pockets of happiness. Maybe not a lot, but in reality, is that not the case? I would expect there to at least be like something. Like it could be like small, like, oh, the day is nice. Or this food is actually quite good. I'm glad I was able to get it. Like something small. Obviously, it's not always a beach episode, but I feel like maybe the beach episode was trying to, one, maintain the balance of the heaviness and some, time to breathe, or that is showing that it's not always sad, 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 sad. There is at least some moments where it's a little bit happy. And I think maybe the way they presented it wasn't done well, but I do think there was some kind of purpose for it. Or maybe I'm overthinking it. You know what? I'm pretty sure I'm overthinking it. What do you guys think? Let me know down below. I do think the things that I did talk about earlier regarding the artist, because I just thought about it. Maybe I didn't explain myself well, but I do think, I haven't really checked out his other works, obviously, because it's not really to my taste, but I do think the character design and the art that he has done for Valkyria Chronicles was done well. And I actually quite like it. It's tame, but it's to my taste, and I think it fits extremely well in the setting of this game. And he has done a very good job. And again, as I said earlier, the content creator who made this video has nothing against that artist, Raito Honjo, and the stuff that he's made. It's just a contrast between what he's typically involved with and this one. That is actually a pretty serious video. Yeah, that's pretty much something I just wanted to clarify. I don't think I explained myself well enough for the artist thing, but I do think it makes sense to at least briefly talk about it, because typically a lot of people like to make fun of a show, even if it's serious, if the artist or animator tends to do R18 stuff for a living, typically. And it just shows that R18 artists can create beautiful pieces of work without having it being R18. And if they earn a living like that, no problems there. Good for them. You can do what you want, kind of thing, right? But I think that's pretty much what I wanted to get with it, is that in this video, it's a pretty serious video. So having comments that talk about like, oh, he created this kind of work, R18 work, ha ha ha, doesn't really fit the narrative for this video and the comments section for discussion wise. And I think that's pretty much the reason why he brought it up. I'm not really entirely sure, but that's the point that I wanted to make. And I don't know if I actually explained that well enough at the time when I saw that part and explaining it. But anyways, let's keep going since we're almost done. I just really wanted to bring that up because it was bothering me that maybe I didn't talk about it well enough. And even for the things I talked about in this video about the Kanto earthquake and other historical stuff, or even societal issues or social issues, obviously they're all sensitive topics. So if I did offend you in any way, I apologize. I'm just doing a mere discussion about my thoughts, especially since this is a pretty sensitive topic for the most part when it comes to discrimination, persecution, and racism and all of that. But I do want to say that this is a very good video. I'm quite enjoying the way that they're presenting things and explaining the presentation of the persecution and atrocities of the game, but also acknowledging the downsides that the game has done so far when it comes to representing those aspects. It actually helped me remember a lot of things that I myself was not happy with when it came to the anime, even though I do have like a very positive view of it.
And I have to respect that. It also walks its way into inherently tricky topics, into narratives of oppression and personal versus systemic problems, and frankly, it does a better job.
I do have to agree that it does a pretty good job with making the personal and systemic problems mash well together. Although, even though there are some issues with that too, just as he explained. But yeah, it does do a better job than other series that I've watched. I'm not talking about games because I don't play enough games to talk about it, but I have watched enough anime and read enough light novels and webtoons and all of that stuff and dramas to be able to at least discuss about that. So I do have to give a lot of credit for Valkyria for being able to step away from the usual portrayals of such, sensitive topics and painful moments compared to other series.
Job than some other war media I've seen. It does a better job than some Holocaust fiction I've read, which, to be frank, might have more to do with that subgenre having a worryingly low bar all its own, but that's a topic for another day. Its faults are less predictable so much as they are a product of layered implications, and I don't think anyone would seriously walk away from a game like this with their main lesson being from the clumsy bits.
That's
it makes
true.
you think, and it does a lot with the relatively short time it has to develop its world. From a world-building position, it surpassed expectations. From a narrative one, it did as well. From a, well, not historical one, but from a context and historical issue sensitivity one, it did way better than one could ever hope from a game that was pitched to its lead composer as World War II, but there's a swimsuit scene.
That's
it's
funny.
Also pretty fun or whatever.
Game review score.
Well, at the very least, I'm excited to see if YouTube, the platform, hates the topic of this video. But I'm sure at least someone has had thoughts like these stuck in their head for half a decade and enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching and sticking around. Next time there might be a question and answers in the outro. Also, thanks to the people who donate/tip to help make this all doable, particularly Jan Ursa, Cesare Mikua, Defender, Freddy, Galactic Beyond, Isaac of Lyria, Lissing FMA, Mark Soto, Michael Kelly, Nick, Ned Slogan, Sippa Turnipsy, Queen Naked Mole Rat, and Vichire. Last month was a bit of a rapid growth period, and I've been doing some bureaucracy and figuring out copying stuff, and sorry if there are any patron mistakes or slips through the cracks. I'm trying to think of new ways to show the names that feel fair. No promises what next time will be, but it's definitely not about Valkyria Chronicles.
Fair.
So, bye.
I do think he has covered the video basically very comprehensively. At the very least, I know it covered... But I do think that he covered everything very well. At least it covered everything that I remember seeing from the anime. Like I said, I never played the game, but I did watch the anime back in like 15 years ago-ish. I never rewatched it, so it's amazing how much they actually did take from the game to create the adaptation. As I said before, it's a nice casual watch, but I don't think you should expect it to be like perfect adaptation of the game. I think I remember hearing people like complain about it actually. But as someone who's an anime only, it was actually quite enjoyable. And it was nice to hear and understand the differences between the game and the anime storytelling presentation-wise. Obviously, the game sounds like it's a lot more comprehensive with the presentation of the topics at hand, which is the persecution and atrocities of war, with the addition of the beach episode because it's with swimsuits. But the characters, I think what I most appreciated about that series, though, aside from the way that they presented the persecution and atrocity, is the way that the characters individually don't stand out so much. Like, they all fit in very well in the world. Like, when you think of other series, you think of like at least one character or two, and they just stick out like a thumb. Actually, I don't know if that's the right term, but they stick out so much to the point that you can't ignore it. You just remember them so well. But when you think of Valkyria Chronicles, you just think of the whole group. Like they fit in so well to the point that, oh yeah, they're definitely part of the world, and they blend in so well. That's one thing I really enjoyed about this, not game, because I never played it, but one thing I enjoyed about the anime. But I hope you enjoyed watching me checking this out. Again, if you have other videos you'd like me to check out, then make sure to comment down below. And of course, support that creator's video as well if you enjoyed it and haven't played Valkyria Chronicles and would like to watch more of their content. I have a lot to think about now, but I do hope that what I said and commented and sharing my thoughts were pretty comprehensive. I do apologize about that artist one, because I don't think I was able to discuss it well until the very end, which I don't know how many people are going to reach here, but if you did, then comment down below. Comment, let me see. Comment Valkyria in the comments if you have reached this point. And thank you if you did. But again, if you enjoyed it, then make sure to give it a like, comment down below, subscribe and share, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!